Hello and welcome to Recap 40. Today we look at the romantic movie Somewhere in Time. Spoiler alert. The movie starts. In May of 1972, at a college party, a theater student Richard Collier celebrates his first successful play. During the celebration, an elderly lady sat across the room starts to approach him and places an antique golden pocket watch into his hand and pleads to him, "Come back to me," and leaves. His girlfriend asks Richard, "Who is she?" He has never seen her before. The lady returns to her residence afterward. Walking into her room, the elderly lady is approached by her maid who asks about the play, but she quietly and emotionally enters her room and closes the door. Her maid wonders if she's all right. Sitting in a rocking chair, she held a playbook by Richard Collier dearly to her chest. 8 years later, Richard is a successful playwright and living in Chicago. He has broken up with his girlfriend and is struggling with the writer's block. Feeling so stressed from writing plays, Richard decides to relax and travels out of his hometown to the Grand Hotel. While touring the hotel's museum, Richard observed a portrait with no name plate and becomes entranced by a captivating photograph of a mysterious, amazingly elegant young woman. Determined to find out who this lovely woman is, Richard asks for the help of Arthur Beale, an older gentleman who has been working at the hotel since 1910 to find the name of the beautiful lady. Richard discovers that the lovely lady is Elise McKenna, a revered actress of the American stage in 1900s. She was a star in a play at the Grand Hotel in 1912. So mesmerizing by her beauty, he decides to stay back at the hotel longer to conduct meticulous research on her biography. At the library, he saw the latest photograph taken of Lady Elise, and learns that she was the elderly lady who gave him the golden pocket watch 8 years earlier, but sadly, she passed away afterward later that same day. Richard decides to visit Laura Roberts, Lady Elise's former housekeeper and close companion, to inquire info on Lady Elise. He shows Laura the golden watch that Laura knows is very precious to Elise. This golden watch disappeared the night she died, the same day she watched Richard's play. Laura shows Richard Lady Elise's theater collection. Laura recalls Elise's mood changed after a play at the Grand Hotel and shows Richard a photograph of Elise's manager Robinson. Looking around, Richard saw Elise's favorite book titled Travels Through Time written by Gerard Finney, a professor at his college. Looking at the table, he discovers a music box that plays the 18th variation on Rhapsody on a theme of Paganini by Rachmaninoff. Coincidentally, it's his favorite musical piece in the whole world. Richard seeks out Professor Finney to ask about time travel. What Finney describes was using the power of self-hypnosis, he can will himself back in time. That is when Richard becomes obsessed with traveling back in time to 1912 to meet Lady Elise, who he has fallen so deeply in love with her enchanted beauty. To succeed, he must disassociate himself entirely from the present, moving everything out of sight that could remind him of it. Professor Finney warns Richard that this process would leave him exhausted, possibly dangerous and very weak. Determined to make the trip back in time, in his hotel room, Richard dresses himself in a 1912 suit, and attempts to force himself into 1912 using tape-recorded suggestions. Multiple attempts fail because he lacks concentration and conviction. He went back to the Grand Hotel Museum and saw a hotel guest registration book in the glass case. An idea rushed to his mind. Richard rushes to find Arthur at his home to look for the guest book of 1912. In the attic lies the guest book that contains his signature on June 28, 1912 in room 416 at 9:18 a.m. Richard strongly convinced that he will succeed. Richard rushes back to his room and once again hypnotizes himself, no longer needing the help of a modern tape recorder, and allows his absolute faith to succeed, taking a mind journey back in time. He gradually falls asleep and awakens to the sight and sound of the year 1912, sitting on a couch, ecstatically saying, "I made it." Just then, a lady entered the room. Richard hides behind the couch and sneaks out. He looks all over the hotel for Elise, meeting Arthur Beale as a little boy, but has no luck finding her. Finally, walking outside the hotel, he stumbles upon Elise walking by a tree near the lake. He nervously walks toward her, beaming with excitement. She seems to be overwhelmed by infatuation when seeing him, but then suddenly asks upon meeting him, "It's you, is it?" He gentlemanly took off his hat, replying, "Yes," just then. William asks if Elise knows Richard, but she claims to not know him. To prevent Richard from seeing her, William threatens to throw him out of the hotel, and sends Richard away. Richard is determined to pursue Lady Elise and followed her to the dinner where he dances with her. William intervenes and has him thrown out. Just then Elise calls Richard back. The next morning, Richard comes to Elise's room to invite her to breakfast, going out for a walk. Persistence pays off and she says yes, the surrounding angelic landscape. Richard ultimately asks why Elise wondered aloud, "Is it you?" She replies that her manager Robinson somehow knows that she will meet a man who will change her life. Richard then shows Lady Elise the golden pocket watch which she will eventually give him in the future. After returning to the Grand Hotel, Lady Elise invites Richard to her play. He attends the humor play and she, in a half-conscious state, recites without rehearsed monologue dedicated solely to him. During the break, Richard finds Lady Elise posing for a photograph. Upon noticing Richard, Elise smiles fondly and radiantly with the glow of affection at that moment that captures the captivating moment and treasures it to the present day. That is the same picture Richard fell into a trance while looking at it 68 years into the future at the Grand Hotel. Not long after, Richard receives an invitation from Robinson to meet him immediately. The possessive and controlling Robinson wants Richard to leave Lady Elise, angrily saying it is best for her career. Richard suspects Robinson is in love with Lady Elise, but Robinson states that he is obsessed with her being a star molded by him and has no interest in romancing her. While going out with her, Richard professes his deep affection for her. Robinson found out and has his people tied him up in the stable. Robinson then informs Lady Elise that Richard has left her and she isn't the one. She does not believe him. Richard wakes up the next day and breaks the ties. He rushes out to find her and discovers that the acting troupe has already left for Denver, not knowing that Elise has returned to the hotel to find him. Richard then goes out to the hotel's deck and falls into despair, but then, down below from a distance, Lady Elise notices him and running towards him. They both show much affection to each other while embracing. They both return to Richard's room and become intimately involved. Later that day, she asks Richard to spend the rest of his life with her and he accepts with so much joy. Looking at his out-of-style suit, she then tells him that she will buy him a new suit. Richard begins to reach into the pockets. He is shocked when finding a new shiny Lincoln penny with the mint dated the year 1979. Just then this modern coin breaks his hypnotic suggestion, and Richard feels himself being pulled back from 1912 as though through a time tunnel, while Lady Elise screams his name in horror as he tries to pull with inexorability and helplessly back to his present day. Richard wakes up in the same room, although now it is 68 years in the future. He is so emotionally weak and physically drained from his trip through time, and most shockingly the devastatingly unexpected return that draws him into a state of depression. He, of course, tries to hypnotize himself again, but without success. So sad and desperate, he wanders around the hotel, looking at Elise's photograph. At places where he spent wonderful time with Lady Elise. Richard eventually returns to his room and remains there in a depressed state for days until discovered by Arthur and the manager. Seeing how bad his physical condition is, they send for a doctor on site. Richard is in a state of despair. Just at that moment, Richard dies from a broken heart. His spirit merrily joins Elise in the afterlife. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe and like for more movies.